Today's menu is the Gosetsu Udon from Shokugeki No Soma Season 3. This is a dish that features potatoes as the primary ingredient, which is used in both the udon noodles and the mochi cake topping. To begin today's recipe, we're going to need 2 potatoes, or about 300 grams depending on how big your potatoes are. Starting off, we're going to simply peel off all of the skin. Once your potatoes are peeled, we're going to cut each of them into 1 cm thick slices. After that, we're cutting each of those slices into 1 cm strips. You've most likely guessed the next step. We're taking those strips and then we're cutting each of those into 1 cm cubes. Once you've got all of your potato beautifully diced like this, we're going to transfer it into a steaming basket, and then we're going to set that basket onto a pot of simmering water. Cover the basket with a lid, and we're going to let the potatoes steam for 12 to 15 minutes or until they're cooked through and tender. While that's happening, we can quickly make our soup. So in the anime, Yukihira and the rest of the gang had to make this dish using basic essentials in a Japanese kitchen, which in my mind would include all the stuff for making dashi.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
I've covered how to make dashi in my previous video for beef katsudon, so I'll quickly breeze through this process, but feel free to check out that episode if you want a more in-depth recipe. In a saucepan, I'm combining 600 ml of water with some kombu and bringing that up to the boil, making sure to remove the kombu when the water comes up to a simmer, because that way the kombu is not going to make things all weird and bitter in the dashi. Then once the water is boiling, I'm going to turn off the heat and add in some bonito flakes and let them hang out in there for a few minutes or until the flakes sink to the bottom and the color changes from this to this. When the dashi reaches that point, we're just going to pour it through a sieve to remove all of the bonito flakes, and then we're going to season this soup with 2 tablespoons or 40 ml of mirin and 1 tablespoon or 20 ml of soy sauce. Taste this for seasoning and adjust this with more mirin and soy sauce or salt as required. Keep this off to one side while we go back to our potatoes. After 15 minutes of steaming, your potatoes should look something like this. Exactly the same. But when you stick a knife into it, you should feel that there's little to no resistance and it takes no effort to cut it into smaller pieces. At this point, we can take the potatoes off the heat and transfer them into a large bowl. Now, using a potato masher, a fork, or if you're a little bit bougie, a potato ricer, we're going to mash your potatoes until it's completely smooth. So seriously, take your time with this and make sure that your mash is lump free, because the last thing we want is chunks of potato in our noodle dough. Now for a potato udon, we're going to be using 100 grams of our mashed potatoes, and to that we're going to be adding in 100 grams of potato starch, 200 grams of all-purpose flour, half a teaspoon of salt, and 120 ml of water. Give this a quick mix together with some chopsticks or a rubber spatula until it forms a shaggy dough before dusting your work surface lightly with some more flour, and then we're going to knead this by hand for about 10 minutes. Or if you prefer, you could also do this in a stand mixer with a dough hook for about 7 to 8 minutes on medium speed. After 10 to 15 minutes of kneading, your dough should be soft and springy like this, and now we're going to divide the dough into 2 portions and work with one piece at a time. To prepare our dough for rolling, we're simply going to pat it out into a thick flat square. Then using a rolling pin, you ideally roll this out into a 15 by 30 cm rectangle that is half a centimeter in thickness. Clearly, I didn't achieve that today. If you really wanted to, you could trim this dough into a rectangle to make all your noodles the same shape when you cut it, but I'm really not that fussed by it when I'm just cooking at home. Now to cut our noodles, we're going to start by dusting the top of our dough with a little bit of flour. Then you'll want to take the top third of the dough and fold it down towards the center. Dust the dough lightly with flour again before folding the bottom third of the dough up towards the center to make 3 overlapping layers. Dust the dough lightly one more time with flour, and now we're going to cut our noodles. I cut my udon pretty chunky, these are about 1 cm intervals, but of course choose whatever thickness you like. After you've cut the noodles, you just want to unfurl them to prevent them from sticking to themselves. Then I like to lay them out over a chopstick or the handle of a wooden spoon so that they're easier to transfer into our cooking water. Now just before we get on to cooking our noodles, let's prepare all of our garnishes, starting with our potato mochi cake. Using our remaining 200 grams of mashed potatoes, we're going to combine that with 2 tablespoons of potato starch and knead them together until they're well combined. Roll this out into a thick cylinder, and then we're going to cut the dough into even sized rounds. If they need it, flatten them out and reshape them into fat little discs like I'm doing here. Set these off to one side until you're ready for pan frying. The next garnish we're preparing is the fried herb. Now in the anime, it looks like they use a perilla leaf for this, but I can't easily get a hold of some without making like a 2-hour round trip from my house, so I'm going to be using a mint leaf as my next best option. Simply dust your herb of choice into some potato starch so that it's fully covered, and then set that off to one side until you're ready for frying. And then of course, no bowl of noodles is ever really complete without some spring onions, which we're just going to slice nice and thin. Cut up as many of these as you want, and then we're just going to keep it in a ramekin until we're ready for plating. Now let's move on to frying. Starting with the potato cakes, we're going to start by heating about 2 teaspoons of vegetable oil into a small frying pan over medium heat. When the oil is nice and hot, we're going to lay our potato cakes into the pan and allow them to fry on one side for roughly 2 to 3 minutes or until they form a nice golden brown crust like this. When that has been achieved, you'll want to flip the potato cakes over and let them fry on the other side for another 2 to 3 minutes. After that, remove them from the pan and drain them on some paper towel to remove excess oil. With the remaining oil in the pan, we're going to gently lay our coated herb into the hot oil and allow that to fry for about 10 to 15 seconds on each side or until you can see it starts to crisp up and solidify. Drain this on some paper towel until you're ready to assemble. With all of our garnishes prepped, it's finally time to cook our noodles. Into a pot of boiling water, add in 1 portion of your cut potato udon and give them a good stir to ensure that none of the noodles are sticking to each other. Once the udon floats to the surface of the water, they need to be cooked for 5 minutes. Then after 5 minutes, we're removing them from the heat before draining and rinsing the noodles under running water. This is going to stop the cooking process and more importantly, rinse off any excess starch which would make our noodles feel extra slimy. Once that's been done, we can finally put this bowl of udon together. Into your bowl of choice, start building this meal by placing in your cooked potato udon. Next you want to pour in enough of that hot soup until the noodles are just peeking out of the liquid. Then to garnish this bowl, we're going to start with one of our crispy, golden potato mochi cakes. Following that, we're adding in a generous handful of our sliced spring onions. Finally, we're going to gently place in our fried herb garnish, and here you have the Gosetsu Udon from Shokugeki No Soma. So apart from the herb garnish not being a perilla leaf, I think we did a pretty damn good job at recreating this dish visually, but now let's get into the taste test. In my opinion, the potato udon turned out really well. They've got that characteristic slippery and smooth udon mouthfeel, and there's a nice level of chewiness to them, and you still get a nice amount of that potato flavour coming through. The potato cake is soft and chewy on the inside, and the crisp outer shell it developed from the pan frying adds a nice textural contrast to the dish. The soup is light but full of umami thanks to the bonito flakes and kombu. The slight sweetness of the mirin also helps to lift this bowl of noodles up from feeling too heavy with the potato cakes and the noodles. And overall, this is a fun and relatively easy dish to make, and if you've got some leftover mashed potatoes in your fridge, I definitely recommend trying to make this. As always guys, thanks so much for watching today's episode. If you enjoyed it, let me know by dropping a like down below and let me know in the comments what food from anime and other media you'd like to see in the future. Subscribe to the channel for more nerdy content, and until then, pull up a chair, unfurl that napkin, and I'll see you in the anime kitchen. Cheers.